All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about something that's hiding inside pretty much every piece of technology you touch, from the phone in your pocket to the most advanced military gear on the planet. We're talking about rare earths and how China built a strategic grip on them that some are now calling an impossible problem to solve. And to kick things off, let's start with a puzzle that gets right to the heart of it all. So, to really get a feel for the stakes here, ask yourself this question. Think about the F-35, the most advanced fighter jet in the U.S. arsenal. What do you think could possibly take it out of the sky faster and more effectively than any enemy weapon? Yeah, the answer isn't some new missile or a sophisticated cyber attack. It's just running out of a couple of key ingredients. The biggest threat isn't on the battlefield. It's buried deep, deep inside the supply chain. And those ingredients? Well, they're a group of 17 elements called rare earths. Now, you've probably never heard of names like neodymium or yttrium, and that's okay, but they are the quiet, absolutely essential backbone of our entire high-tech world. And I mean, just look at where they pop up. We're talking about the super powerful magnets inside F-35 engines and electric vehicle motors, the super precise components in missile guidance systems, and even the bright, vibrant colors on your smartphone screen. They are literally everywhere, and they are absolutely critical. Here's a great way to think about it. You only use rare earths in tiny, tiny amounts. You might have an advanced radar system that weighs almost half a ton, but it might only need a few hundred grams of these elements. But just like salt in a recipe, if you don't have that tiny pinch, the whole thing just doesn't work. Period. Okay, so this brings up a really important question, and honestly, probably the biggest misconception about this whole topic. I mean, with a name like rare earths, you'd assume they are, rare, right? That their scarcity is the whole problem. But the answer to that is a huge, resounding no. The name is maybe one of the most misleading in all of science. The real problem has nothing to do with geology. It's all about industry. And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. If you look at where the reserves are, sure, China has the biggest slice of the pie, but these things are found all over the globe. Vietnam, Brazil, Russia, they all have huge deposits. So the key takeaway here isn't about who has the minerals in the ground. It's about who has the power to pull them out and turn them into something useful. So how in the world did we get here? How did the United States, which was once the absolute king of this industry, end up handing over the crown? Well, it all goes back to the 1980s. See, for the US, processing rare earths was becoming a real headache. It's a dirty, messy, energy-guzzling process. And it was starting to clash with stricter environmental laws, rising labor costs, and public worries about pollution. So America made a simple economic choice: ship the work overseas. And China? Well, they saw a massive opportunity with cheap labor and an intense focus on industrial growth. And you have to understand the numbers behind that choice. They were just too good to ignore. Estimates figured that by moving all this production to China, American companies could slash their costs by anywhere from 30 to a whopping 70%. It was an economic deal that was basically impossible to say no to. But here's the thing. This wasn't some happy accident for China. Their rise was a deliberate, decades-long play. It happened in two big phases. First, a sort of Wild West period of chaotic, cheap production, which was then followed by a very calculated, strategic takeover of the whole industry. This timeline really tells the whole story. Back in the 70s, the US was the undisputed champ, churning out most of the world's supply. Then came the 80s and 90s, China's wild growth era, when they just flooded the market with low-cost rare earths, basically pushing everyone else out. But the real game changer was in the 2010s. That's when Beijing stepped in and merged hundreds of small, messy operations into 6 massive state-controlled giants, and that gave them total command over the entire supply chain. And fast forward to today, the result is just wow. The dominance is absolutely staggering, and it's not just about digging stuff out of the ground. China controls nearly 70% of the initial smelting and separation, over 90% of the really complex finishing and refining, and an unbelievable 91% of the market for rare earth permanent magnets, the kind that are vital for both military tech and the green economy. Okay, so this is where we get to the heart of the problem. If another country wants to break free from this, why can't they just, fire up the old mines again? Well, it's because digging the ore out of the ground is actually the easy part. The real near impossible challenge is rebuilding an entire industrial ecosystem, basically from zero. And to really wrap your head around just how ridiculously complex this is, we're going to zoom in and look at just one single element: gallium. It's a key ingredient for advanced radar and communications, and it's the perfect example of the entire rare earth supply chain problem in miniature. The very first hurdle you hit is just scale. Mind-boggling industrial scale. You see, you can't just go open a gallium mine. That's because gallium isn't mined on its own. It's a byproduct. You only get it when you're producing something else entirely: aluminum. And this chart just says it all, doesn't it? If you want gallium, you need a gigantic aluminum industry. In 2024, China made 44 million tons of aluminum. The US, a little over 2 million. To get its own gallium, the US would have to build up a massive aluminum industry, creating a product it might not even be able to sell because it'd be competing with China's cheaper version. So the scale is a huge problem. But let's say, just for a second, a country decides to go for it anyway. Well, that's when you run smack into hurdle number 2, time. This isn't a project you can just knock out in a year or two. We are talking about a decade, at a bare minimum. And let's break that down, right? You're looking at a couple of years just to find the right places to mine. Then another 3 to 5 years to build all the roads, ports, and factories. After that, you need another 3+ years just to design and build the special machines you need, which is extra hard because China now blocks the export of that very technology. And even then, it takes years of trial and error to get the chemistry just right for that 99.999% purity that high-tech gear needs. But even if a nation has the industrial scale and is willing to play the long game for a decade, it hits a third wall. And this one might just be the most insurmountable of all: energy. The amount of electricity you need for this it's almost hard to believe. Just look at China's aluminum industry. On its own, it burns through about 600 billion kilowatt hours of electricity a year. To give you some perspective, that one single industry in China uses an amount of energy equal to nearly 14% of the entire yearly electricity generation of the United States. You'd need a power grid on a scale that almost nobody has. So, you add it all up: the insane scale, the decade-long timeline, the mind-boggling energy needs, and the locked-up technology, and you start to see the bigger picture. It's not just a challenge anymore. For a lot of people, this looks like checkmate. And that leaves us with this final, kind of chilling takeaway. The real kicker is this: even if a nation like the US could somehow, magically, overcome all of those hurdles, the decade it would take to build that new supply chain is a decade it simply doesn't have. Because during that rebuild, without a steady flow of these elements, the very defense and tech industries you're trying to save would have already ground to a complete halt. It's a trap with no easy way out.